Welcome in, everybody, ready to dive deep into the psychology of money. And hold on, before you click away thinking this is just another finance lecture, I promise it's not. We're going way beyond the spreadsheets today, folks. We're diving headfirst into the psychology of money by Morgan Housel. Get ready, because we're going to explore some of the wild ways our brains really handle money decisions.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? We often think of finance as this, very rational thing, very numbers based. But the reality is our emotions and our own experiences play a huge, sometimes even like the main role in how we handle money.
Totally. And you know what? Housel kicks things off with this story that really highlights this. Like, he introduces us to this tech millionaire, super brilliant guy, clearly successful in the business world, but with some, let's just say, interesting money habits.
Interesting how.
Think like flashing around huge stacks of cash, bragging about his wealth. You know the type.
Yeah, I know the type.
Yeah, so it's like, what's up with that? Right. And that's exactly what Housel digs into.
And it's so interesting because it just proves a point the book really drives home. We often misunderstand why people make the financial decisions they do. And instead of judging, like you might do initially with this millionaire, the book encourages us to try to understand the stories people tell themselves about money.
Well, that's so true. It's like this millionaire, maybe his story is all about proving he's made it, right? Like maybe he struggled for years to get his ideas off the ground, or he came from nothing. So this outward display of wealth, it's like part of his narrative.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
about recognizing that everyone's relationship with money is deeply personal, and our experiences shape these powerful narratives that end up driving our decisions, even the ones that seem, well, maybe a little irrational from the outside.
Totally. It makes me think of that lottery ticket example from the book. You know how it seems like some people just throw money at things with like terrible odds?
Yeah, like those scratch-off tickets.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's often not about logic, right? It's about the story they're telling themselves. Maybe it's a story of needing a miracle, or maybe just desperately wanting to change their lives. And I think recognizing this can actually help us be more aware of our own, potentially irrational impulses when it comes to money, don't you think?
Absolutely, 100%. And it reminds us that logic and numbers, while important, are only one piece of the puzzle. So often our emotions and like our deeply ingrained beliefs about money are the ones really calling the shots?
Which, speaking of, brings us to another fascinating point: the role of luck in financial success. And honestly, the book uses Warren Buffett as an example, and I got to admit, it made me really rethink that whole self-made narrative we hear so much.
It's easy to look at someone like Buffett and just assume, right, like his wealth is purely a result of skill, of knowing the markets better than everyone else. But then Housel throws in this curveball. What if Buffett had started investing later in life, like way later?
Yeah, it's kind of mind-blowing when you really think about it.
Totally. Even with his incredible, almost impossible track record, if you adjust for the time he had, the outcome is completely different because he's had decades for the magic of compounding to.
To do its thing.
Yeah, to really work its magic. It's like he had this massive head start in a race that most of us didn't even know we were running,
Hmm.
which honestly is a bit of a sobering thought when you put it like that.
It is. It
Yeah.
really is. And to further drive this point home, the book compares Buffets to Jim Simons.
Uh,
You familiar with him?
I am.
Okay, so Jim Simons, amazing hedge fund manager with, I mean, phenomenal, almost unbelievable returns, right? But because Simon's investing career didn't span the same, like, extended time frame, his overall wealth doesn't even come close to Buffett's. And get this is despite having a higher average annual return. So it's not just about, like, being good at picking stocks or timing the market perfectly.
Mhm.
It's also about how long you're in the game. The time itself becomes a form of leverage almost.
Absolutely. And this really, I think, underscores how much we tend to underestimate the power of time and just long-term thinking when it comes to, well, building wealth. It's not always the sexiest strategy,
It's
but
like we're so focused on the finish line, we forget it's a marathon, not a sprint.
exactly. And that actually segues perfectly into another crucial concept from the book, room for error. It's not just about being smart with your money, it's about being smart about how much risk you're taking. Housel, he compares successful blackjack players to really savvy investors, and you know what they have in common? They both plan for things to go wrong.
They don't go all in on every hand or every hot stock tip.
Nope. Because the reality is no one has a crystal ball. No one can predict the future perfectly, especially in something as complex and, let's face it, human-driven as the financial markets.
Totally. It's like how some people are always trying to time the market, buying low and selling high. Like, that's the dream, right?
Sure, but the book really emphasizes how even like the most seasoned investors, with all the fancy algorithms and data, even they can't predict those peaks and valleys with like 100%
Oh,
accuracy.
so then what? Give up.
That's where room for error comes in. It's like you
Yeah.
got to expect the unexpected. Housel uses this great example of Bill Gates. Remember when Microsoft was just starting out?
Yeah.
So Bill Gates, he was so smart about this. He made sure Microsoft could cover a whole year's worth of payroll, even if they didn't sell a single thing.
Seriously. Wow. Talk about planning for a rainy day. Makes my little emergency fund seem kind of sad.
It's about having a buffer, right? So that a few bad bets or, life throws you a curveball, it doesn't completely wipe you out.
Yeah, no one wants to be left with nothing. Speaking of not getting wiped out,
Hmm.
I thought it was really interesting how the book also talks about how you don't have to be perfectly rational with money either. Sometimes, peace of mind, like you were saying, it's just more important than always chasing the absolute highest returns.
Right. And this is where it gets really interesting. Housel, he talks about this study, right? About using leverage to boost your returns in like retirement savings. So on paper, yeah, a leveraged approach, it could mean way higher returns. But the
It's
catch,
way riskier too, right?
exactly.
Right.
And not just financially, it was too emotionally stressful for people to actually stick with it.
So they'd panic and sell at the first sign of a dip.
It's human nature. And here's the kicker. The study found that even if that leveraged portfolio completely tanked, like went to zero, it would still outperform a more conservative approach over the long run if investors just stayed the course. But that that's a big one. Emotionally, it's just not realistic for most people.
So even though it was like technically the optimal strategy on paper,
Yeah.
it backfired in the real world because it didn't factor in, the human element.
Precisely. And that's why House emphasizes over and over again that we have to factor in our own psychology, our own risk tolerance. Sometimes a good enough return that lets you sleep at night is way more valuable than some theoretically higher return that has you like constantly checking the markets and stressing out.
Totally. There's more to life than refreshing your portfolio every 5 seconds.
Right. It's about the bigger picture.
Which actually reminds me another point I wanted to hit. We got to remember, not everyone is playing the same game.
Oh, that's huge.
Yeah, Housel uses the dot-com bubble as a prime example of this.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. Because it's so easy to look back and be like, oh, that was obviously a bubble. But at the time,
It felt different, right?
totally. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, I think what Housel's getting at is that different investors, they have different goals, right? Different timelines. Some people are in it for the long haul, they're thinking decades, and others, they're just trying to ride the wave, make a quick profit, and get out.
So someone who's making like what seems like a crazy decision to me,
Might just be operating on a completely different time frame. They're playing a different game.
and they might even be playing it really well, just with different rules.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's like day traders versus someone planning for retirement, right? Two different worlds.
Totally.
This whole idea of different games and different players, it really makes you think twice before following the herd.
100%. It's a big reminder to really define your goals, your time horizon, and then make decisions that align with your game plan, not someone else's. Don't get swept up in a strategy that might not be right for you.
Right. It's like figure out what game you're playing first, and then you can worry about the best moves to make.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered stories we tell ourselves about money, the often overlooked role of time and luck, leaving room for error, not being afraid to prioritize peace of mind.
And crucially, being aware that not every investor is playing by the same rules. Understanding those different investing games can really save you from some costly mistakes.
It's a lot to take in. What's standing out to you so far? I know, right? It's almost like we need like a whole new playbook to navigate this whole financial world, one that actually takes all these psychological factors into account.
And that's exactly what I think is so great about this book. He doesn't just point out all the problems, the pitfalls, he actually encourages us to embrace those psychological factors and
Yeah.
use them to our advantage.
Okay, so then how do we do that? How do we take all this like incredibly insightful but kind of head-spinning information and actually turn it into better decisions?
Yeah, for me, a huge takeaway is how Housel really reframes how we think about money altogether. Like, he makes the point that money, it's more than just a tool for getting the stuff you want, right? It's a tool for actually shaping your life, for having more control over your time.
Oh, I like that. Because
Yeah.
we don't always think about it that way, like money equals freedom.
Hmm.
But
But it's true. It's not just about like buying a fancy car or a bigger house, right? It's about like having the option to walk away from a job you hate or take a year off to travel or even just like not worrying about every unexpected expense that pops up. That kind of freedom, that's priceless.
Yeah, no argument there. And it's something we can all relate to, right? That
Mm.
feeling of security, of having options,
Yeah.
of not feeling trapped by financial constraints. That's powerful stuff.
It really is. And Housel, to really drive this point home, he tells this very personal story about how he actually turned down a super lucrative investment banking job. Imagine that.
Whoa, turning down the big bucks. There had to be a good reason.
Right. And the reason was he realized that the real cost of that paycheck, it was actually sacrificing control over his time. And that was something he decided he valued more.
Wow. That's a powerful story, and it really makes you stop and think, Like, what's truly important? Are we just chasing the biggest number,
Right.
or are we actually trying to build a life that, like, truly aligns with what we value?
Exactly. It's about recognizing that wealth isn't just about your net worth. It's about how much control you have over how you actually live your life. And sometimes that means making choices that might seem unconventional, prioritizing freedom and flexibility over a bigger paycheck, even if it means swimming against the tide a little bit.
So, as we kind of start to wrap up this deep dive into the psychology of money, what would you say? Like, what's the one key message you really hope listeners take away from all of this?
I think if I had to boil it down to one thing, it's the importance of self-awareness. Like, really take the time to understand yourself. What are the stories you're telling yourself about money? What are your own unique biases? And then here's the key. Factor those into your financial decisions. Don't let those hidden forces sabotage your financial well-being without even realizing it.
Because as we've discovered today, those stories, those beliefs, those biases we have, they're way more powerful than we often realize. And they can really trip us up if we're not careful.
100%. And the good news is, once you understand those forces, you can actually start using them to your advantage to make more conscious choices, more intentional choices about your money, choices that actually align with what you truly want your life to be about.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Eh?
So to all our listeners out there, as you continue on your own financial journeys, remember this. There's no one right way to manage your money. It's all about finding what works for you, what aligns with your values, your goals, and your own unique story. And never, ever underestimate the power of understanding your own money psychology. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone. And until next time, happy investing.